By now, you have probably seen examples of generative AI. These are machine learning models like ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, and Midjourney. But how can these models be used in game development? And what can be different about the resulting games? Stay tuned because all that and more will be answered in this video. I've split things up into four main categories, each with their own timeline and implication. Start off with, we have Category 1 game development, where human developers use generative AI within their existing workflow. The overall structure and flow of game creation is the same, but AI is introduced into developer toolkits. This has the shortest timeline of them all of today, with many developers already integrating generative AI into their workflow, and AI tools being integrated into game engines like Unreal Engine 5. But what does Category 1 game development imply? Well, this can be taken in two directions. One, we could increase the quality or scope of games while maintaining similar costs to before, or two, we could lower the cost of development, either by hiring less people or shortening the time scale required to make the game, while still maintaining similar quality and scope to before. But at the end of the day, it's just the same, but more. More studios able to make more games with more scope and higher quality. But the games they make are the same as the games of today. That's boring. Can we do more? Can we make games and craft experiences not before possible? I believe yes, and to look at how, we will move on to category 2, 3, and 4 game development. We will come back later for category 2, but for now we will skip ahead to category 3. Category 3 is probably the most popularized direction generative AI is taking in games. This is a traditional game where certain aspects of the content are generated by AI in real time. Many videos online show this off through tech demos where an NPC can respond directly to your questions. These systems are coming, but there's a lot of work that has to be done to take things from tech demo to compelling product. The most obvious roadblock is cost. Current large language models like GPT-4 are very expensive to run, and the cost of computing quality output will need to dramatically go down for the value add to outweigh the costs. The less thought about aspect is the amount of work required to properly integrate a generative AI like GPT-4 into a video game world. An NPC is not interesting because he talks to you, but because he is a character that fits into the world. People you meet in Skyrim are fast to tell you if they are on the side of the Stormcloaks or the Empire, grounding them in the world. Amazon forces engineers to write fake press releases on a new product before developing said product in an attempt to ground the product around why people care about it. I think a similar paradigm will come to gaming, where you first have to write the wiki for your game so that large language models can ground NPC dialogue to the world they exist in. This wiki, of course, can also be written in part by a large language model, expediting the whole process. On top of backstory to pull from, developers also need to program a pool of actions the NPC could take. It's one thing for an NPC to say something based on your input. It's a whole new level when things happen based on your input. While Category 3 game development can utilize components from Category 1 game development to ease the burden, it will, by and large, be more difficult to develop and get right. It also requires a level of maturity from the technology that puts it on the 2 to 5 years from now timescale. In Category 3, only some aspects of the game were generated dynamically, but in Category 4, the entire experience is generated by AI. A system creates characters, dialogue, sprites, and programs interactions, all on the fly in real time. It can respond to player feedback, designing components around what the user likes, creating infinite content around what they like, but all different enough to keep it interesting, allowing players to explore game design without actually having to make games. It would be the video game equivalent to Shark Tank, but you are the shark and the contestants are an AI that come to you with better and better game ideas, all shaping from your feedback. And with the press of a button, you can share this experience with a friend and they can join you and explore the world together, both of you geared with your clothing and items from NFTs you own, and then an update drops and you stream the game directly into your brain via Neuralink, and it's important not to get carried away dreaming. When most people think of Category 4, they imagine something along the lines of what I just laid out. But I think of TikTok. The game makes what you want, and TikTok has shown us when you wire an AI to as close to the human brain as possible with a cell phone and make it give people what they want, the majority of the content becomes Coomer and Sludge content. While I'm sure people like Asmongold would be ecstatic to wire their brains into Anime Cat Girl Simulator 9000 and live in that world 18 hours a day, I wouldn't. That's why I don't use TikTok or much social media at all. And the time I do spend on Twitter is under the following tab instead of For You, where I carefully curated my follow list so my timeline is only things I find interesting, rather than engaging for the sake of engagement. While Category 4 is the most promising, it's also the most open to lead us to a dystopia. At the start, making Category 4 experiences will be expensive and controlled by the largest corporations. And why would that end any different than the current social media landscape? Why wouldn't they use it to create infinite Diablo Immortal? These kinds of experiences are probably a good 5 to 10 years away, but in the meantime, we will have Category 2 and 3 games. And Category 2 is the one I'm the most excited about. AI systems are not quite at the level required for this, but we are on the cusp, hence the video's title. Many of the short-term problems of Category 3 is cost, and this is where Category 2 comes in. It borrows many aspects from Category 3, like writing a wiki game to pull for dialogue, but instead of generating dialogue every time the player interacts with an NPC, it only happens once in the studio. Most likely it would generate multiple options and the developer could choose the best one, slightly tweaking it if they please. You can think of Category 2 as a pre-rendered cutscene that ships with the game, while Category 3 would be a real-time cutscene showing off your custom character. The latter brings personalization to the game, while the former has a higher quality ceiling due to being able to do expensive computations ahead of time. Half of the complexity in Category 3 is having to pre-develop a pool of interactions for the AI to tap into. In Category 2, this is alleviated, as all the dialogue can be rendered out ahead of time, and then the desired interactions can be added in after the fact. No more guessing what the NPC might want to do when a player talks to them. You get to figure out what the NPC does want to do before programming those interactions. You might be thinking to yourself, that just sounds like Category 1 game development. Humans developing a game with help of AI. But they entail a fundamental difference in perspective. Yes, both are human-AI hybrid game development, but the key is who is in control. In Category 1, it's the humans making games, with the AI helping out in a bottom-up approach. But in Category 2, it's the AIs making the game, with a human helping out, steering where necessary in a top-down approach. When DALL-E 2 first came out, a common phrase I heard was, the job of an artist will be that of an art director. This is what Category 2 game development will look like, where the AI is crafting a single experience and steered by talented human developers. At first glance, this seems like it would have the same implications as Category 1. Cheaper games of the same quality or similar cost at higher quality, but without the real-time interactions that transform the experience in games from Category 3. But the slight difference in who has control changes everything. For that, we need to take a look at player choice in games. Choice is one of the most unique, powerful, and underutilized mechanics in games. The biggest difference between the medium of games and all other mediums is that the player has choice. You don't get to decide what the main character in a movie does, but you do get to decide what your character in a game does. Many games have small-scale choice, choosing how to engage with the content via classes, builds, weapons, etc. But few games have true player agency. In many games, you can choose what NPCs to talk to, what side quests to do, but every player gets the same main story. One of the best examples of true player agency is Elden Ring. You still have the main region bosses that everyone has to fight, but the rest of the game is a masterpiece in choice. If done right, like in Elden Ring, the player can have what can only be described as a transformative experience that transcends the sum of its video game parts. It makes all other games feel like a facade desperately trying to pretend it's more than a collection of shallow choices strung together. So why do so few games capitalize on this transformative experience? The answer is risk, and in two major ways. The first is experiential risk. Since you don't hold the player's hand, you don't get to lead them down a perfectly crafted path where you can guarantee a level of enjoyment. While this does have some validity to it, I get the sense that many developers go too far against this and do not think about the flip side. A term I would like to see popularized that describes this perfectly is helicopter developer, where they try to hold the player's hand, attempting to make sure the player does not have a bad experience. But the developer holding your hand ruins the experience altogether. This was a feeling I had at times playing Hogwarts Legacy. God forbid you let the player try to solve the puzzle you added into the game. That would be too much to ask of them. Instead, we must have the NPC tell the player the solution 3 seconds after they see the puzzle, before they even have a chance to process what's happening. Don't want the player having a bad experience, so they shall have no experience. The second type of risk, and this is a major point, is monetary risk. To choose one thing implies not choosing another, or many other things. Playing a sorceress implies not playing a wizard or warrior. Making a meaningful choice in a story implies gaining access to something and losing access to others. To create a vibrant world loaded with meaningful choice and true player agency could mean the player only sees 10% of the game. But that also means the game has to be 10 times the size of that player experience. Imagine for a second you are a game studio and have the option to make two games, A and B. Game A is a standard video game of standard size, cost, and experience. Game B, on the other hand, attempts to implement true player agency with an intended experience the same size as Game A. A transformative experience, while way better, might only be 2 to 3 times the experience of a standard game. Moving on to costs, while not being linear with size, might end up being 5 to 8 times that of Game A. Now, the player experience to sale ratios does not go linearly because of the distribution of markets, but it's also not just about creating a larger game, but getting all the aspects right. Why would a development studio choose Game B when they could go with a much safer option in Game A? And that's the way it's been, until now. This brings us back to Category 2 game development, where AIs make the game and humans are there to help out and guide the process. Most of the work is in setting up the infrastructure, wiring things together, fleshing out an ethos of the world to build a story on top of. The majority of the cost is in creating the scaffolding for the AI. Growing the content from the scaffolding is the relatively easy part. Taking a look at this chart once more, but from the perspective of a Category 2 game development process, the size and experience are the same as before, but the cost could drop to a scale of 2 to 3 times that of Game A. All of a sudden, things look a lot more economically viable, where the risk is worth it. I believe we will see games being developed in the coming years leveraging Category 2 game development to create complex experiences that transform the definition of video game as we know it today. It's an idea I want to experiment with, trying to make one of these games myself, and something I will share the progress of on this channel. In a few years, we will look back on games like Elden Ring as the pioneers of true player agency in games, even if primitive, and AI as the component that made this kind of game design viable for the masses. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts, please leave a comment below with them. And if you want to keep up to date with my attempt at trying to utilize Category 2 game development to make this kind of experience, do hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one.